Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Coast-to-Coast Combat Hour. I'm your host, Matthew Hawkins, and as always, I'm joined by my co-host, Ed Carbajal. Check us out weekly at allaccessmma.com for our video podcast link. This week, we have the pleasure of welcoming back Dr. Jon Lucas, who's been a friend of the show. Actually got a Facebook alert today that you were on March 16th last year. So I think the Combat Hour is going to have March 16th is going to be Jon Lucas Day from this day forward. Thanks for joining us, Jon.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me back on.
Yeah, man. I mean, I always like getting your takes, especially with everything going on in this sport. And just before you jumped on, before we started recording, Matt and I were talking about, it seems like these days ringside physicians are getting almost the same type of, I don't want to say, what's the word I'm looking for? Virility as far as being viral online.
Publicity, maybe?
Yeah, publicity. Every time an event happens, the people start... The way refs and judges get targeted lately, ringside physicians have been coming up more often than we can remember. And for folks that haven't heard any of the previous episodes with you, I mean, you serve as a ringside physician in South Carolina?
South Carolina,
yeah. So, I mean, when you see these things trending online, how do you react to it? I mean, do you ever feel like jumping in and in the mix, or do you stay out of it, or what's your take on it?
As a general rule, I generally stay out of that. There's plenty of people that have kind of cultivated an online persona commenting on all things medical related to fight sports, and I kind of let them have that, especially with my role acting as a ringside physician. I don't think it's appropriate in a lot of cases to comment on decisions other folks have made, especially when people are, in a lot of cases, doing that, have to comment and have to kind of get their name out there. That's not my goal. I know it's ironic to be saying I'm not trying to get my name out there when I'm appearing on a podcast yet again, but I don't think that's really a good role for me in what I do, to try to be commenting and second guessing continuously online with things other people are doing. I will sometimes chime in, either in settings like this or on Facebook feeds or on the online forum, about my thoughts about why somebody did what they did, or why I might have done something a little bit different. But I try to avoid doing a whole lot of associated commentary with that.
Now, the latest I guess non-stoppage that was kind of on some people's minds, and I was actually at the event, was the Rafael dos Anjos versus Renato Moicano co-main event from UFC 272. In that fight, obviously RDA did his thing and pretty much put a beating for the good chunk of the first 4 rounds, at least, on Moicano, leading to multiple times where the doctor was called into the ring. Severe facial lacerations, swelling, a lot of the stuff that we've kind of got used to as combat fans and seen, but maybe lose perspective on what that is actually doing to the human behind the scars there. Do you think that, I don't know. I mean, obviously we're not here to have you judge everybody else's opinion because you weren't standing in that ring looking at the fighter. But as somebody who's gone to a ton of these events, it has seemed weird to me that we've gotten to a point where judges used to really stop fights early. In the early days of fighting, almost any cut, and then seems like we got educated to a point where we learned that the cuts don't necessarily aren't as bad as what they look like. I guess would be the way I would say that. Do you think that doctors have changed the way that they're? I don't even know really how to ask this, but it just seems to me like they're more. They're more judging fights on how they think the fighter might be able to come back in a fight, as opposed to maybe looking at the situation as a whole. What do you think the evolution of ringside officials has kind of gone over the last couple of years? I guess would be the best way to say it.
Yeah, I think from a physician standpoint, part of it is there's been a really good effort by the Association of Ringside Physicians to make available some good criteria about what cuts actually present a danger to the fighter and what cuts just don't look pretty. And most of the stoppages that I've seen, or in particular non-stoppages I've seen, like what happened with Moicano and Dos Anjos, the physician who decides not to stop the fight, I think, is making the correct decision, in that the cut may not look good on TV, and, you know, definitely the person is battered, but there's not something that presents an immediate risk to that person's health and safety. And that's really the criteria that the ringside physician should be using, is this something that is putting this guy at a significantly increased risk for severe injury moving into the future. You know, the ringside physician, especially at a high level professional fight, really shouldn't be spending a lot of time thinking about, well, you know, it's the third round and he's already lost these 3 rounds. There's only 2 left. So I'm basically sending him back in with his only course of winning by knockout. That's not really the ringside physician's role.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the referee, on the other hand, I think should be making that kind of thought. You know, if they're watching somebody get peppered for 3 straight rounds, especially if there's a couple of probable 10-8 rounds in there, or especially if there's 4 rounds where the fighter's down and they know the only chance of that fighter winning is by knockout, and in particular in either lighter weight classes or in fights where the person who's losing hasn't landed a clean shot the whole fight, I think it's very appropriate for both the fighter's corner and the referee to be thinking, yeah, we need to stop this, because you're not winning and you're just taking damage that's just not appropriate. And I think when we talk about the other stoppage, I think you're going to probably jump to after this, I think that kind of plays in. But from a medical standpoint, I think the change that you've seen is the education that's available about what cuts are dangerous and what cuts aren't. And I think most ringside physicians spend a good amount of time looking at what other ringside physicians are doing. And there's the fact that there's been some fights that have been allowed to go on, including the one that I let go on when the UFC was here in Greenville. And I got a lot of grief, I think specifically from you. There was a couple of memes floating around online about letting that fight go because of that cut. But that was a good example, I think, of, it was a cut that didn't look pretty. It was a big cut and it was fairly deep and he was bleeding quite a bit, but it didn't present an immediate risk to him. So we let that go on. And everybody in that situation, I think, played the role correctly. And the same thing with the Moicano fight. Goddard brought the physician in when he thought that there needed to be a decision made about whether this was a medical problem or not. And the ringside physician said, nope, not a medical problem. So Goddard let it go on. I think that's exactly the way that it should have gone. It's the same thing that happened here in Greenville. Big Dan brought me in thinking I was going to stop it. I didn't. He said, okay, if you think he's good to go, then off we go.
How hard is it for you to kind of like, because, you know, I mean, as well, all 3 of us, we are fans of the sport too. We watch them, you know, when we don't have anything to do with it. Otherwise, when we're home, most events that we watch, like how hard is it for you to kind of, I mean, obviously you're a professional. I mean, you're trained to separate the fan. It's funny because I asked this question to Eric McGracken, who does the Combat Sports Law website, and you know, at the end of the day, it's you have to kind of remember to protect these gladiators, so to speak, from themselves, and that the whole passion to win. And so sometimes they're not thinking about their safety, whereas you're better trained to look at them and say, listen, it's time to I'm making the call. Like, how hard is it for when you're watching stuff? I mean, and the other fight that you said we're going to jump to, like the Chris Moutinho, he came in short notice against Sean O'Malley, took a pretty bad beating for the length of the you know, he went the distance, and then he just fought again at was it this past weekend or the weekend before?
Yeah, past weekend's fight night.
Yeah, and you know, the stoppage seemed to come, you know, rightfully, and nobody seemed to have a problem with it, but a lot of people were bringing up, you know, why was that different than the O'Malley one? Like, do you ever, you know, how hard is it for you to kind of say a yes or no, or in your own mind agree with a take like that, being someone, like you said, you've been in the position before? You know, just can you just speak on the difficulty, especially with a situation like that, when it's like, seems like one person has cared more about the fighter than the other?
Yeah, so, you know, it's definitely a judgment call. I think that if you took those fights and were able to substitute out different referees and different ringside physicians, you would get different decisions about when to stop the fight and when not to. And the fact that whenever there's a controversial stoppage or controversial non-stoppage, there's always people on both sides, you know, arguing it should have been stopped, it shouldn't have been stopped, kind of speaks to that. If it was easy and clear all the time, there'd be a lot less debate when something like that happened. So, it sort of depends on the situation. That's one of the things that's unique about ringside medicine is most of the time in medicine, when there's something that's not 100% clear, you've got time to figure out what's going on. If someone's clearly dying in front of you, there's a protocol you go down. And if someone's not clearly acutely, having something terrible going on, you have time to do extra tests, ask for second opinions. But when you get called into the ring, you've got to make a decision very, very quickly about, is this going to go or is it not? So when I'm sitting there watching fights, and I would imagine most other ringside physicians do the same thing, you're kind of looking at the fighter who's losing or the person who you think you might have to stop the fight for and see how they're reacting. Are they still in it, throwing smart shots, defending intelligently, moving well, acting the similar way they did before the fight started? Or are they kind of fading and just standing there, trying to go out on their shield, but just taking unanswered shots and getting worse and worse and worse in their defense instead of better and better and better? Or are they getting, really tired? Does it look like they're injured? Have they stopped using a certain part of their body, or have they stopped, responding to shots coming from one side, indicating they're probably not seeing real well out of that eye, that kind of thing. So that's kind of playing in the back of my head. And then when it comes time to go in and make the decision, you kind of have to make a snap decision about, is this person at risk for getting seriously hurt if I let this continue or not?
Yeah. I have a follow-up really quick. What's the is there an area of expertise in medicine where that's preferred to have the duties of a ringside physician? And I'm sorry if I asked you this before, but it just jumped in my mind right now. Like, do you have to be a certain, or do you have to be a vascular surgeon or something? Or
no, there's definitely not. If I had to pick the ultimate person to be a ringside physician, it would be a group of people. It wouldn't just be one. And that's one of the reasons why when I helped do the medical team here, we had a couple of orthopedic surgeons, a neurosurgeon, and then myself. But all that the promotions and all that the athletic commission is looking for is someone with MD or DO after their name. They don't care what specialty they have. And if they had to pick a specialty, I'm certain that pediatric cardiology would not come up on their list of preferred specialties. So, I mean, it's really a thing all in and of itself. If no matter what your specialty is, if you're not interested in ringside medicine and willing to put some work in it, you're not going to be real effective at what you do. But I think that the most common are typically ER docs in primary care, especially family medicine, seem to be the big two. And then, a smattering of orthopedic surgeons or sports medicine docs.
Cool. I guess my question would be, so just so I'm clear then, I've always understood it that the only person that could stop a fight is the referee. He can take advice from the doctor. The doctor can say stop it, but in theory, the referee could keep it going, correct?
That is correct.
And then
the opposite is also true. The referee doesn't need me if they think someone's hurt. Even if you have a completely incompetent physician who's like, no, he's fine, even though there's clearly something wrong, the referee has full authority to stop the fight. So that is exactly correct. At least in all of the commissions that I'm aware of, it's the referee who has that ultimate decision.
And that goes into also with the corner throwing in the towel. In theory, the referee could pick up the towel and throw it out of the ring, but we just don't see that because this is not, a Rocky movie or something like that. But
yeah,
go ahead.
I was saying, and in most commissions, I don't think that throwing the towel in is even legal. If you want to stop the fight, you're supposed to alert the commission representative, and then they'll tell the referee.
I believe, yes. Yeah, but generally, the one to get hold of everybody's attention is throw something into the ring. I feel like we need to start, and I've always bounced on the line between early and late stoppages in the sport. That's been something that goes back to the single-digit UFCs, with some stuff like that, with controversies. I feel like the corners need to have more of when there's the pre-fight meeting and stuff. It's hard to remember the last time a corner stopped a fight. I see it in boxing quite a bit, actually, a lot more in boxing. And I don't know if it's because the end result of boxing is always basically a face plant, or we acknowledge that there's more brain damage. Maybe I wonder when MMA corners are going to evolve, and maybe that's to do with pay. and the doubling of pay and all that stuff. But I feel like we need to start putting more pressure on corners to protect their fighters and take a little bit off of the referees and the doctors.
Yes, I mean, I think that would be great. I don't think it's going to happen, particularly in high-level MMA. So I talked to again, what they're told before the fight sort of depends on the commission and the referee who's giving the pre-fight instructions. But the referees that typically work events in South Carolina always make a big deal out of that. That, you know, if you think your fighter is in trouble and isn't coming back, protect your fighter, stop the fight. But it's very rare to see that in MMA. And I think that there's a number of reasons for that. One of which is I think that in a lot of cases, if a fight was stopped by the corner, I think there's a very good chance that they're going to lose that fighter. The fighter will bail from their camp, even though that is clearly in their best interest. And in a lot of cases would probably be best for their career. It's just that whole ethos of going out on your shield is so prevalent in MMA that people are very reluctant to do that. I went to one event in particular. It was a boxing event, though, where almost every fight was stopped by the corner. It was a fight between soldiers down at Fort Jackson. So it was it was a thing that was put on by USO or something like that. So they had Marines fighting Army guys and, Navy and whatnot. And it was great because the fights would start. And some of the fights were fantastic, very, very well matched. But as soon as that needle was clearly tipping towards one fighter, because these are all active duty soldiers whose commands need them to be operational, as soon as it was clear that someone was in trouble, in came the towel and 0 people got hurt. It was wonderful. And I don't think there was a single person either in the crowd or that was competing that felt like any of the stoppages were unwarranted. They're, especially in boxing, a little bit less so in MMA, but especially in boxing, it's not that hard a lot of times to tell there's no way that this person's going to be able to come back and win this fight. And I think if we could get that sort of thing to happen in MMA, not necessarily every single fight being stopped like that, but when someone's clearly getting stomped, if the corners were more likely to say, yeah, we're going to stop this and come back and literally fight again some other day, I think we would see a lot fewer significant injuries and there'd be a lot lower incidence of CTE and some stuff like that in some of these fights, particularly like the O'Malley fight, where it didn't look like that a stoppage was going to happen. I mean, as far as actually a stoppage caused by one of the fighters was likely to happen. If one of the corners had said a little early in the fight, man, our boys, Chris has just taken a lot of damage here. We know he's not going to stop. We just he took this on short notice. He's getting thrashed. Let's put an end to this and then come back to the next fight. I think that would have been much better for his career, but it's just hard to get people to do that because what the chatter would be online. Every podcast and their brother be, he's a wuss and, shouldn't be fighting.
Yeah, and those are the guys that are just, I mean, that they're not thinking about these competitors as human beings either. I mean, I always kind of, it's funny. Like I said, I mentioned the appearance with McGragan that we had. I always find it hard to we get me and Matt joke about the Just Bleed fanboy, and then we all have that in us, and when we calm down and we get back to ourselves, then we realize, hey, wait a minute, these guys, somebody could die in there. So like we have to really kind of like view it, as objectively as we can.
Responsible human beings.
Yeah.
And the pay structure probably doesn't help any either. And Matt was kind of hinting at that. When you're sitting there with a towel in your hand and you're thinking, man, what if he throws a knockout punch and now instead of getting $500,000 and you get $1 million and maybe a fight of the night bonus, the chance of winning a fight of the night bonus on a fight that was stopped by a corner seems like it would be a lot less. And I think those thoughts, they may not be consciously in the corner's mind, but they got to be bouncing around in there somewhere that they could be adversely affecting their pay by doing that. So
it's funny. It's funny that you say that because after all this happened, of course that came up, and then I know I retweeted it, but I mean I think it was Moicano who just recently tweeted something around the fact, like, the golden rule is the person that has the gold is the one that makes the rules. And I don't know if that was in reference to everything that happened with him or what, but it's just like you said, the fighter pay issue keeps coming up, and it sucks that would have anything to do with it. But I mean, let's move off of this and move
real quick though. I want to just throw this
Go.
in there not to extend too much.
Mhm.
Do you think that the stoppages in boxing, I know this popped into my head, but when you as a boxing fan, as somebody who grew up watching boxing before MMA, in my mind, well, I mean, we're told the greatest boxer of all time is Muhammad Ali, and for my whole lifetime, all I saw was a guy who struggled to live basic life,
Mm.
at least in public. So I wonder, and I'm not, God forbid somebody passes away in MMA, but I wonder if something like passing away in a ring is something that it would actually take, or another 15 years where we start seeing our fighters that we love talking like marble mouth and shaking uncontrollably, if that'll be something that'll wake up. Because I feel like whether it's war or anything across this world, everybody's into it until they see something really bad happen, and then all of a sudden it changes you. I feel like even these MMA camps, where it's the toughest dudes in the world, would be affected if the fight before them somebody passed away in the ring. I think, or the event before them, or event year before them. All of a sudden, you're going to start thinking maybe it's not worth that extra $20,000, or $40,000. So I don't, something just popped into my mind. But when I think of boxing, I think of Muhammad Ali. We really don't have that in MMA. We get this lie about nobody ever dying in MMA, which got brought up again this week, which we all know. Anybody who really follows the sport,
not
knows that that's a joke. And I don't even know why we still, and but Michael Bisping, promoted that propaganda that no one's died in MMA, and maybe he meant the UFC, and MMA just comes out of his mouth. But I feel like that's a dangerous, slippery slope to walk when you try to go, yeah, our sport's great because no one's ever died, when all it takes is a Google search.
Yeah, and from your point about whether things may change when we see the effects, it's only been relatively recently that you've heard a lot less about the gym wars. When it wasn't that long ago that guys were getting concussed constantly during training and running up to big fights. So because of the CTE attention, people have finally realized that that's not a good idea. Not just because there's no reason for that sort of tough guy attitude in the gym, but that it adversely affects your career. I think that at some point people will start realizing that about the letting your fighter just take a pounding when they have no legitimate chance for coming back and winning the fight. But it's probably going to take something really bad happening in the ring, just like the weight cutting issue, because the long-term effects by definition are long-term, and MMA fans have an extremely short memory. So seeing somebody who's 10 years out of their career that's, tripping over their words and having a really hard time, stringing together a sentence, I don't think is going to be enough to sway people's view.
It's going to have to be a shock of it happening.
Yeah. Something, like something really bad. Yeah. So, I mean, we were talking again. The other thing is obviously when we kind of came up with this weird March schedule for your appearance on this podcast. It started with the COVID-19 pandemic because we wanted to have somebody with some medical sense versus our two dumb fanboy asses, trying to talk COVID-19 and protocols and stuff like that. So we've been through more than a little over 2 years of MMA happening with various protocols, and now there seem to be pretty standard for 2022. We talked about that memo that was that went out to fighters. Nolan King over at MMA Junkie wrote about how there's like the 3 testing, the at home, the arrival, and then the weigh-in day test. I mean, do you think that's just good? This going to be the standard all around now? You think that's safe? What's your take on when you how COVID protocols have evolved, especially being in your shoes, having to officiate fights?
Yes, I mean, it really depends now on, I think, what the incidence of COVID infection in the community is. If there's if there's a situation where the numbers continue to drop and COVID either disappears entirely or falls dramatically into the background, then I don't think there's really need for much COVID protocol at all at events. And, as you mentioned, I'm in South Carolina, where it's basically we're operating here as if nothing ever happened. They're having huge concerts and football games inside, outside, and things like that with, thousands of people jammed together. We don't have any specific protocols for COVID at fight sports events unless the particular promoter is trying to do that. And given the typical political leanings of fight sport fans. Not surprisingly, the promoters in the area are not real eager to be the only one asking people to wear masks and, that kind of stuff. So on the other hand, if the numbers start going back up in a particular area, then I think trying to do sort of what the UFC is doing, making sure that guys don't have COVID so that they're not likely to be spreading it amongst the other fighters and inside the quote unquote bubble, just to keep the event going, makes perfect sense.
Yeah, with the money involved in UFC, it's a different ballgame. Do you know of any cases in South Carolina where somebody had COVID, didn't say anything, and it was spread to anybody else at an event or another fighter? Anything that you can even
not specifically, but I mean, during the Omicron surge, there was such a high incidence of COVID in South Carolina. If you just basically touched two people on the forehead and said you have COVID, the chances you would have been right on at least one of them be pretty close to 100%. So I'm sure there's been some transmission at events, just because there had been transmission at all sorts of other non-fight sport events, but there's no specific instance that I'm aware of that a fighter had COVID and gave it to another fighter or things like that. There's, of course, people who somebody on their team got COVID and then they tested positive when they were fighting for a bigger promotion. But I don't think that that's necessarily event specific. That's just kind of what happened with everybody during the pandemic.
So based on what you just said about, the region of where you're at and stuff's been happening like kind of like regular, do you think that's going to be a pick up business for you as far as getting more work as a ringside physician? Or
yeah, I mean, it has throughout the entire pandemic. As soon as things started opening back up a little bit in South Carolina, South Carolina and Florida were two of the first states to start doing events and things like that again. So we've had a number of promotions that have started doing events in South Carolina that had never done so before, because there was a scene here where there wasn't where they were at. And then you guys probably don't follow the debacle that North Carolina has had with their commission, but their commission lost funding. So they haven't had a fight sport event in North Carolina for a couple of years now. So we've had a number of promoters kind of dip across the border, because there's a number of towns, like Charlotte is basically on the border between North and South Carolina. So you can do an event in Rock Hill, which is on the South Carolina side of that border, and it's only 10 minutes away from Charlotte. So you'll get all the same people who would have gone if it had been in Charlotte, but you can hold the event in South Carolina because we have an active functioning commission, where you can't currently in North Carolina because there isn't an active functioning commission. But good news on that front. There's pretty reliable rumors that commission is going to be back up and running, and the person that rumors are saying that they're going to appoint to be the head of that commission is a good dude and has a lot of experience with boxing, a very active referee. So hopefully they'll be back up and functioning soon. But the short answer to your question is, yeah, for sure, it has increased the number of events in South Carolina.
And I guess that's kind of where I was going to go then too, because we've seen how Florida has become kind of the fight sport capital of the world at this point, between MMA, really the hub for bare knuckle, multiple organizations. So it's kind of interesting how, it sucks that South Carolina kind of had to take advantage of the situation of COVID shutting down so many other places. But, it sounds like you guys got a pretty good commission. They obviously got a good doctor. So the more events that you guys have in your state, as a fan, I certainly think that's probably better for the sport.
We tried real hard to get the UFC to come back here when they were, doing the Fight Island stuff and then looking for a place to come in. There was many phone calls heading to Las Vegas going, hey, don't forget, you guys have been here, thought that it went great. We'd love to have you back. But, Florida's got like probably 5 times the population we have in some bigger arenas and whatnot. So we lost out on that.
Yeah. And it seems like there's just a lot more of the fighters trained there too. So it seems to just logistically make a lot of sense to visit there as often as they can. During this whole thing, as when there was no event and then the uptick happens, like when you started working, were you ever nervous or concerned? I'm like, oh man, this thing is going to be weird, or like, was there anything? Obviously, if there was no fans at one point, you're probably that was probably an easier night than letting fans back in the arena.
So we never, in South Carolina, we never had an event without fans. We never had an event during that point in time. So when we had events, it was with fans. And the first event, the first MMA event that I went back to as the things were opening back up, everybody said, yeah, we're going to wear masks. And I say everybody, like the commission folks and whatnot. But I don't recall seeing more than a handful of fans in the entire arena that had, or it wasn't an arena, it was a ball at a convention center. But there's probably 4,000 or 5,000 people there, and I don't think more than a handful of them had masks on. So it's one of those things you kind of have to realize what you're getting into. I mean, it's like if you don't like drunk people, don't go to a bar. If you're real worried about getting COVID and you're counting on people to be doing everything they possibly can to avoid transmitting COVID to other people, then go into an event with 5,000 people who like watching dudes punch each other in the face is probably not the place for you to go. Yeah. So I haven't been real nervous about it myself, because I could just say I'm not going. But I mean, I'm relatively young. I think I can still say that since I'm not 50 yet. And then I'm not in terrible shape, don't have a lot of health issues, and have been double immunized and vaxxed or boosted for whatever that's worth with the newer variant. So I figured risk reward wise, it was relatively low risk on my part. And so far I haven't died from it, and hopefully it'll stay that way. So I wasn't super nervous. The only time that was really weird, I did do an event. It wasn't MMA, but where the organizers had people, everybody, including fans, wearing masks, and the fighters wearing masks up until the actual event, and then had everybody at ringside wearing goggles as well. And it's just weird, being in a tournament and watching 9-10 hours of fights in a day with plastic goggles that you can't quite see right out of, and have that weird motion parallax, and every time you breathe out they fog up. But I mean, it was it was more important to me to be there and try to support getting fight sports going than it was to worry about being a little bit uncomfortable. So
well, I mean, I feel like we should probably try to talk about something more positive here. We've got you on, knowing that you're just a fan of the sport. Let's set the doctor stuff aside. Is there what over the last year, any fighters, anything that's really stood out, any fights? What from the last year has put a smile on Doc Lucas's face just as a fan that he's got to see? I know we didn't give you time to prep for this, but anything that pops into your mind, positive, maybe from South Carolina, a new organization, or an event or anything like that happened
so there's
last year?
A couple. One of them, and I'm not even sure if this is really a new organization or whether it was an organization that just wasn't that active in the United States, but you've probably heard of XMMA. They've got a lot of former UFC fighters. So
we had Bobby Nash on just last week.
Oh yeah, okay, that's right. Yeah. So they have that Black Magic event going on in a couple of weeks. So they had an event they put on here right in Greenville at our what used to be the Bilo Center, now is the Bon Secours something or other center. So the same place that the UFC was at when they were here. And their production value was fantastic. They had a good complement of fighters, and I don't know exactly who their matchmaker is, but whoever it is or whatever team they have does a really good job of figuring out people that their styles match up well. A lot of times when you watch former UFC fighters in some of these smaller regional events, they're kind of getting squash matches where everybody comes out to see Joe used to be a star beat up on someone who has no chance of winning, and that was not the case with these fights at all. They had really, really well matched fights, and their broadcast team here was Frank Mir and Eric Apple, so two dudes that know everything there is to know about MMA and fighting and are really well spoken. So it was that was one of the most enjoyable events I've ever had to attend, because it's just great hanging out with the fighters beforehand and kind of talking about what they were doing and their training and kind of what their plans were for the career. The fighters all got along really well. It was really, really cool. And then,
I was just going to say, unfortunately, because I mentioned Bobby Nash, and for folks that listen to this, we had him on last week, and now the fight with him and Felipe Boaventura is off because Nash is injured, and I guess Boaventura is having some trouble getting in the country. But yeah. But I'm sorry. Go ahead. You were saying?
And then just in general, it seems like that the level of well-roundedness, or the level of competence in multiple styles, continues to go up, especially at the higher levels. When you're watching Bellator and UFC fighters now, it doesn't seem like there's anybody who's not good at everything. They may not excel at everything, but you don't see a lot of fights now that someone has no idea how to grapple, or has no idea how to do jiu-jitsu defense, no idea how to avoid takedowns. So it's been really interesting, I think, and as new things get sprinkled in, like the calf kicks that have become so prevalent, and seeing how people are going to, kind of defend on that, and how different things in jiu-jitsu, different jiu-jitsu moves seem to get popular for a while, and everybody kind of figures it out and moves on to something else. It's been enjoyable watching that.
Yeah. You ever like as a fan when you're watching, you ever sigh when you see a matchup like Justin Gaethje versus someone, you're like, oh Jesus, this is not a guy I want to make any calls. You know what I mean? Like because I was just talking about the 274 lineup today. I mean, you got Gaethje and Oliveira and Ferguson and Chandler, and it just jumped in my head now. I'm like, man, if I was a ringside physician for that card, I'd be like, oh God, can you get somebody else to do this?
It's OT.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that literally, that even happens even at local events. There's some guys that I know have a lot of scar tissue in their face,
Yeah.
so I know that as soon as the fight starts, they're going to be bleeding from multiple places, or guys that have a history of really good knees and someone who likes to wrestle. So you're like, well, I don't know, this guy could probably be catching a knee to the forehead sometime in the fight. So there's definitely stuff like that happens that makes you think maybe this isn't a great idea, but.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's it from me. I don't have any more questions, but I don't know if you have some stuff that you want to plug before we let you go, or anything like what does Doc Lucas have on the agenda outside of ringside officiating?
Not a whole lot. Everything else has been pretty straightforward at work. Now fortunately the pandemic, at least the most recent spike, is trending down. Work is kind of heading more towards typical work and less coronavirus stuff. There's the most exciting thing for me in the immediate future is I've been asked, hopefully next Thursday, appear before the South Carolina Senate and potentially get appointed to the South Carolina Athletic Commission. I've been hearing that for almost 10 years now, so this is the closest that's moved to actually coming to fruition. So hopefully that'll become a thing, and we'll get our commission filled out. And
Do you have any events, or I know you've competed in some jiu-jitsu stuff. Do you have anything on the calendar in the near future?
I don't. I'm actually been debating for a while about whether I'm going to be going back and competing significantly in the future or not. I kind of said when I started jiu-jitsu I would compete at every belt, and I've competed a ton at purple belt, so I feel like I've ticked that box. But I've had 3 surgeries on my hands in the last 2 years, and then with the pandemic, and going to be 48 this July, it's getting harder and harder to to stay healthy long enough to really make a run. I know where I want to be in order to compete and feel like I actually present a threat to the people I'm competing against. And especially now that getting to be a higher belt, most of the guys, even at Masters 4 that are competing, own a school or basically training full time. And that's just not me anymore. I'm lucky to get to class 3 or 4 times a week in an open mat, where I used to be training pretty consistently 6 or 7 sessions a week, and even lifting weights and things like that. I still do it and still do cardio, but if I ran across the me from 5 years ago and we went and tried to run, I'm certain that the me from 5 years ago is in significantly better shape than I am now. And the me now would need a couple extra days to get back to baseline after competing. It's just the risk benefits not necessarily there, but we'll see when I get my brown belt at some point. Hopefully I may say, hey, you know what? I'm going to stick with that and go out and compete a couple times again. But it's not going to be like, I used to compete at least 6 to 12 times a year. I don't see that ever happening again.
Yeah, it gets harder when you get up there in age. I'm completely content with just getting my matches in at the gym and teaching a few classes. I'm completely fine with that. I'll help the younger guys, do their thing, but some injuries it seems like you're going to feel them forever. And
and it's the younger guys is the thing, really, if I was going to compete, it would probably be IBJJF, because you're going to get somebody who's literally your own weight, in your own age, in your own belt, where a lot of the local tournaments, most of the people I was competing against are 15, 20 years younger than I am. And when I go to the gym now and you touch hands with some kid who's 16, but he's been training 9 hours a day since he was 4. The next thing you know, you're twisted up like a pretzel. It's like, man, this George is a great guy, and he's not trying to hurt me. If we were actually at a tournament and he was going full throttle, this might not turn out good.
No, yeah. Then you find out, I'm like, when they tell you the definition of there's levels to whatever this is, and yeah, it's definitely a different difference. So you just got to go get your sweat on and work. Do it for exercise. That's what I do, man.
Yep. I try to compare myself against people my own age that don't train at all and think, okay, I'm doing good. Because when you start looking at some of the upper echelons of people in our weight classes and belt classes, like, man, I might have been wasting the last 10 years of my life.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I look at guys, you know, there's once in a blue I'll run into someone that I went to high school with that's around my age, and they literally look like they could be someone my age's dad because of how bad they look, and I'm just like, all right, I guess I'm doing something right then. As long as I can still, scramble about and defend myself, I think that's good enough for me. But all right, well, I mean, if you have nothing else, you would let folks know where they can follow you. And
so I'm not super active on social media, but like on Twitter or on the MMA forums, my username is the SCMMAMD. I think on Twitter there's an underscore between the SC, the MMA, and the MD, and that's pretty much it. As I said, not super active these days on social media. If I'm commenting on fighting, it's usually going to be on the MMA community forum.
Awesome. Well, thank you for coming on. Best of luck with your meeting with the commission next week.
Yes, sir.
Obviously, that would be a feather in any commission's hat, and to do it in your local neighborhood there, where you've worked for years, would be awesome and be good for the state and be good for the sport. So we will be rooting for that. We will also try to update people as you let us know. So to find that information, follow us at Combat Hour on Twitter, Coast-to-Coast Combat Hour on Instagram. You can follow me, Matthew Hawkins, at MMAHawk21 on Twitter and Instagram. Follow Ed at Carbazol on Twitter, Carbeerzol on Instagram, and Old Head Carb on Twitch. And once again, you can always find us at allaccessmma.com. Check out allaccessmma.com for MMA news and our video podcast. John, thanks. Appreciate it every time you come on. Appreciate the insight, and it's not just us two talking to each other about stuff we don't know anything about. So thanks as usual, and Ed, have a good night, and thanks for listening, everyone.
All right, y'all take it easy.
Peace.